This will be another quite long video, just two small fuck ups. This time around it will be a video about getting the harvester head on the harvester back together with some new parts in it. I had two of these like central lubing hoses because some of the places that needs lubing is very hard to access, so there is like a bunch of these hoses going around getting access, but they did not come pre-installed with the nut and the like seal ring, so I added those and tightened up to get it to kind of seat in place before installing. Needed to get access under the oil tank for the saw bar chain, saw chain lube, some cleanup under there. And I was gonna replace one of the hoses down to the cylinder that activates the saw bar, but there is a kind of a cover plate here that I've replaced one of the hoses down to it earlier, and that went fine, but getting this one out seemed impossible, so I had to loosen two bolts in here. Quite hard to get access there under some other hoses and so on. The cylinder and everything was already removed in the previous video, so I just needed to loosen the other end of it. Had to remove the upper plate also. That will be in the future one of the small fuck ups. Had used a string to be able to help pull the new one down. It wasn't leaking or anything, it just damaged in the coupling a little, so it was annoyingly hard to undo, and figured it would be tricky to get the threads to start. And one of the lube hoses is down here to the end of the hydraulic cylinder. It had to be loosened from a clamp with the two other hoses. One feeds pressure to tension the the chain, sauce chain, and the other is for the lubrication for it. And then you have this one that actually lubes one of the mounts for the end of the cylinder. So it was just quite easy pulling it through and fitting it. And the other one that I had found that was broken was very hard to get in place. It was nestled together with another one, so there was some zip ties I had to remove. It was threaded under the valve block, and it's in here. It's actually the mount, the end for the one of the cylinders that activates the feed rollers, and here you can see the new one in place. If you were quick at looking, it was a shiny part in there. And here are the new parts: the saw bar, the saw bar clamp, I think would be the proper English term, svärdklämma in Swedish. A little bit more of a cleanup before starting to install the new parts. And with that done, I wanted to replace this. This one has been without lubing for a long time and had kind of a lot of wear on it or play. Even if the new one had more play than I would have liked, but it's still better. And it had one of those lock rings that are stupidly annoying to get in and out. It does not have the rings where you can use pliers, it's just a smooth ring. And is there a tool to actually remove them, or is it just get really mad with fine screwdrivers and picks? And also I missed installing that new bushing. Had purchased some new bolts before assembly also, and I had transferred over the bearings for the drive shaft for the saw chain, There are some lock rings in there, a spacer, and a few other bits and pieces. I think I covered that better in a previous video where we replaced these bearings a while back. So go back in time and look for that video if you want to see more of that. And here is the big fuck up in the video, because I figured I could pre-install the shaft that I had. When I took things apart, it was actually removed before I took things off the harvester head itself, but I figured I could take a shortcut and install it. I could not. I used the wires also to help, kind of. It was a little tricky holding things in place. Even installed the drive wheel and everything. Yeah, I needed to shorten a couple of the bolts I was replacing. Also found at the end of the drive shaft for it the threads were a little messed up, so I figured I would clean them up before installing everything. Had to install stuff to be able to hold the shaft in place and stop it from spinning. Once I was happy with the threads, I continued to look at the bolts. I double measured so I wouldn't have any bottoming out of the bolts. Then the housing for the bar clamp I started installing with a lot of tapping. And here I realized I fucked up because I can't install the inner part with the drive shaft in place, and I figured should I kind of get it back out a little and try to mount both of them at the same time, and that would have been really hard. Decided to simply install the housing fully and remove the shaft again. So that's what I did. I could have saved some time here if I had just been smart. So if you do this, be smart and don't. The housing itself is made up of two parts. I could have broken that apart, but I figured I would rather not disturb the bolts there and risk something. The spacer in between the bearings I left in the hole there. I pre-lubed everything, so it was very gooey. Some more tapping to get the shaft out of the bearing, and then reinstall the bearing. And now I could fit the O-rings for the, because there is oil feed through this, both for the sober oil and the tensioner, and there is also a channel for if you have the stump treatment. If you handle spruce in the summertime, it's recommended you have stump treatment, but I'm not cutting any spruce. It's mainly south part of Sweden. Normally up north you do it in the winter, if you can. Torque things up, got the shaft back into place again, and could for the final time tighten things up. Removed a few burrs I found, and then I could start installing the sprocket for the sensor wheel, and then the teardrop thing that actually tells it that the saw bar is in its home position and it's safe to feed a log through. I had replaced the bolt here. If you've seen my disassembly video, you know I had a little bit of trouble removing these bolts. Some tapping and tensioning, tightening it up. It's a very small Allen head countersunk bolt, so it's not a lot of torque on these.
Yeah.
Did take some measurements here because I can see signs that this teardrop has been impacted by the bolts holding the big hydraulic motor at some point. And I wanted to like double check that I don't have any issues with that. I actually dry assembled it once and snugged things up. I realized the drive shaft wasn't fully seated, so gave that a whack or two, tightened things up. and could feel that the bolt actually sticks out ever so slightly. I think they added an extra washer here at some point that they didn't have when it was first installed. I also double checked how far the sensor would stick in where I had it, if that wouldn't make, if things had shifted a little, that it wouldn't hit that teardrop from the side, rather just go next to it. So everything looked good. Time to get the holder for it, the housing, into the saw bar, into its final location. Tightened up a couple of bolts temporarily, and then I installed the sensors, one on the back that sits against that sprocket and gets pulses as it moves, so the machine knows how far in or out it has moved it. And then the other sensor that gets input from that teardrop, so it knows that it's in its home location. Fit the saw bar just for it to make it easier to move it up and down, and double check that the gave it power, and double check that the sensors got proper input. And here I'm checking that this has like two phases and seems to work. And then the sensor for that the saw bar is in its home position, could see it's once it's a few centimeters out, it loses trigger, but it gets trigger. Some new Nordlock washers and Loctite. And here I missed a little bit of video later on when I did mount the housing for that saw bar clamp. I could get the new hose into place that I was replacing, and my dad was around, helped me feed it through, but he was annoying, so I had to do it myself. Now he's a great help. Then all the bolts here, I just tightened up, torqued them to spec, because here a few were broken earlier, so I figured it's better to have a very even torque here, and that it's correct. Also missed installing the hydraulic cylinder, so that's and I also installed the two feed lines for the saw bar oil and the chain tensioner, but I also missed a little later on that where I kind of moved things up and down and ensured that none of the hoses here, I think the lube hose had come kind of undone a little and been moved, because that had rubbed against something and had a tear in it, and the fitting was also broken off at the end. But I miss a few things. Video is not super priority, but I still like to share with my wrenching, and hopefully it will help someone in the future. Had issues fitting the hydraulic motor because I had to loosen the hose and slide it in between the pipes, or else it was not possible to fit it. Some Loctite on the big bolts holding the hydraulic motor, that could be tightened up. One of the pipes here is very hard to kind of bend it into place, and I looked at if it would be possible to kind of loosen it at the other end and kind of shift it over a little, but does not seem possible, so figured I'd just force it into place and tighten it up, even if I don't really like it. But it's been working so far, so a little bit of a pipe for extra leverage, no way to access with a torque wrench, so here I'm going by feel. The other pipe really lines up well and can be tightened most of the way by hand, so And here I tighten up a few of those hoses. As I said, I missed a little because I had to kind of shift the angle of them to ensure that they've now, with the motor and everything in place, that nothing touches, and hopefully they will be tight enough. Re-tighten the little cover plate under hydraulic tank, and here I do the second small fuck up. And I've done this several times to the point that I'm mad at myself that I actually bolt the tank back down before this small cover plate that has to go on there first. Annoying. Also whacked the delimbing knife, the top one. I've actually kind of hit the track on the machine maybe a few times. Not very many, but a few, and that has damaged the delimbing knife, hammering some material back into place. I might need to grind it a little. And my dad makes fun. Oh, I got oil in my eye. So, cause by now it was time to start the machine and see if things are working without any leaks. And initially it looks good. Turned off the hydraulics out to the harvester head, and we let it run for a while so that it would charge the battery at least, and put the rest of the covers back on, and the cover over the hydraulic motor. I had also ensured that everything was well lubed, all the points that were apart and things that had been broken and missed lubrication. I ensured they were well lubed, and machine could be moved out for now. It's still a little while before it's gonna see any use. Sorted out and cleaned all the tools that had been used and were oily. I've done more wrenching, there will be more videos. Hope everyone having a good autumn and a crappy moose hunting.